What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. And today we're talking some best ball at the wide receiver position. We're continuing the series going through the tiers, and today we're looking at some overvalued players compared to ADP. And we have all of this available for free on the site in our best ball package. That's rankings for all the major platforms, DraftKings, Underdog, Drafters. We have tiers, which we're analyzing here, but if you want everyone in the position group and breakdowns for them, you can find that in the link below. And we also have strategy articles to help you dominate your drafts there too. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. And for the purposes of this video, we are referencing Underdog's ADP. And last thing, we're talking overvalued players. I want to stress that just because they're overvalued in the rankings and the tiers doesn't mean we're drafting 0 of them. My favorite strategy with these players is to isolate them when they fall below their ADP in drafts. And we'll be talking about some later on guys. So that happens quite often for a few of these players. That gives you an opportunity to buy low on them, maybe come in underweight in your portfolio, but not be completely dead if one of these players does break out. There are a few candidates that could do so. Hope that makes sense. Let's dive right in. First player on our list today is Calvin Ridley. We have him as wide receiver 42. His ADP is 56.3. We have DeAndre Hopkins well ahead of him, and I think for good reason. When you look at Ridley, he came back from the suspension last year. Wasn't the best season. He did draw some DPIs, had a couple missed catches where he had 1 foot in bounds. It's really just some boneheaded stuff, so it could have been a better season. But he still was 31st in yards per route run. He had a 22.5% target share, and that's in Jacksonville. You might honestly be able to argue that the receivers in Tennessee are better now that they made so many additions. You're competing with DeAndre Hopkins and Tyler Boyd. And at the very least, Tennessee's receivers aren't that much worse than Jacksonville's, but there's at least an argument to be made there. When you compare Ridley to DeAndre Hopkins, Hopkins bested Ridley in almost every single mark on an inferior offense. Hopkins had a 28.5% target share. That probably comes down with Boyd and Ridley himself, but he was 15th in yards per route run, and that was at age 31. Hopkins is now 32, so you might be able to argue that the age cliff is coming for him. But Ridley's 30 years old himself. I don't think you can make that argument for one player and not the other, especially when Ridley is the player that relies more on the explosive ability in his game, where Hopkins has always been a finesse, route-running, contested catch type receiver. You still have Levis under center. That's a concern. The offensive line is terrible for Tennessee, but the pass catchers are better. They should be throwing a lot. I think a lot of that's going to go to DeAndre Hopkins, who leads this team in targets more than likely, outside of the case of injury. So we'll remain lower on Calvin Ridley for the purposes of this video. Next up, we go to a rookie in Keon Coleman. So this is where I talk about the upside and why you still want to take some of these players, even if you do think they might be a little bit overvalued. And that's where I stand with Keon Coleman. His ADP is 79.2, wide receiver 47. This is a tough situation for Buffalo overall. So the reason he's going so high is they lost Stephon Diggs. There is a chasm at wide receiver. I think most people presume Dalton Kincaid is going to lead the team in targets, and Keon Coleman may be after that. But the Bills drafted him 33rd overall, which is a bit rich considering he did not exactly have the most elite efficiency profile in college. He did play next to Johnny Wilson, so that must be noted. But when you look at all 129 receivers that had at least 75 targets last year in college football, he was 102nd in yards per route run. He never bested 798 yards in any single season in college football, and he also has major athleticism concerns. He stands 6'3", 213. That's awesome. He has great size, but he ran a pathetic 4.61 40-yard dash. This is just a lot of efficiency concerns for a guy drafted 33rd overall, but I do realize 33rd overall picks usually get a lot of opportunity, so let's play that game with Buffalo. He walks right in. Who else do they have? So 2 capable tight ends, Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. They have Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, and they add Marquez Valdes-Scantling. They have a new offensive coordinator, and if you look at what happened with Buffalo at the end of last year, they completely flipped their offense and started going to an extremely run-heavy rate. What else did they do in the draft? They added Ray Davis to complement James Cook. I think there's a chance this run rate is a lot higher than we're expecting, especially with Buffalo projected to be a very good team this year. So it's not only there's questions on the profile, there's competition in the offense, there's some systemic risk too if Buffalo just goes a little run heavier than we expect this year, which I think is somewhat likely in this offense. So quite a bit of downside for a player like Keon Coleman. What I'd rather do is just take pieces of this Buffalo offense at cheaper prices, whether it be Curtis Samuel reuniting with his old OC or Khalil Shakir, who played relatively well at the end of last year. Next up is another kind of dicey one. It's Jameson Williams. He's sort of the darling of best ball Twitter so far this year. But I think we need to talk about some of the downside that no one seems to be voicing this year. Williams has been woefully inefficient since coming out of Alabama as a first rounder in 2022. You have some excuses that can be made. First of all, he had the ACL tear in the college football playoff, essentially ruining a rookie season. Then he missed some of last year because of a gambling incident. And this team now let Josh Reynolds walk in free agency. So there's this hypothetical void in targets that Jameson Williams should be able to come in and take. Aside from the inefficiency, I still don't think he's any higher than wide receiver 3 on this team. I'm including Laporta in this conversation. So that brings the target totem pole to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, then Jameson Williams at best. I'm not even sure that he's ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of targets this year. But there's some other weird stuff on the profile. This is a player that was second in average mile per hour per route, which I'm not sure is necessarily a good thing. When you dive under the hood, they were basically just asking Jameson Williams to run goes. None of the other elite receivers are close to this, like number 1 in miles per hour per route. So what this means to me is you're not looking at a player with a developed route tree either. Again, even if he takes a step forward, he's not going to see more targets than Laporta. He's not seeing more targets than Amon-Ra St. Brown. And what does this offense like to do? They're a run-heavy offense with arguably the best offensive line in football. This is a ground-and-pound team at their foundation, and he's at best the third read in the pass game. It's a little rich for me, ADP of 84.7. We have him as wide receiver 50, which is a little below ADP for the moment. Again, taking him when he falls below ADP because the upside is still there as a former first rounder. Just not something I want to bet on being overweight to in my portfolio. Last one, I think is an easy one, but for some reason he's still going high in drafts. It's Quentin Johnston. Not high. He's going higher than I think he should. Inside the top 150, 149.6 ADP. We have him as wide receiver 80, not even close to where you're going to find him in drafts. What this comes down to is we have a former first rounder who was atrocious last year. When you look at the 64 receivers who had at least 65 targets, he was 62nd in yards per route run. There were only 2 worse than him. He turned 67 targets into 38 catches for 431 yards. That's a 57% catch rate. He had 2 drops. He had a 32% contested catch rate. Didn't really do anything well. And a lot of this is with Justin Herbert till he got hurt. The Chargers are changing offenses. They had the 6th highest pass rate. Now they move to a Jim Harbaugh offense, which projects to be way run heavier. And that's evidenced by their drafting of Joe Alt at number 5 overall, offensive tackle. This is a ground and pound team. And Quentin Johnston is probably the wide receiver 3. You still have Ladd McConkey in the offense, the number 34 overall pick. This current regime drafted McConkey. They did not draft Johnston. You still have Josh Palmer, who already played way better than Quentin Johnston last year. And if you look at the efficiency, yards per route run, Johnston was behind Alex Erickson and Darius Davis. There's a chance that this player doesn't even start in 3 wide receiver sets. And again, this is a team that's going to run the ball quite a bit. They made a lot of additions at tight end this offseason in free agency. You might be seeing less 3 wide receiver sets, more 2 tight end sets. There's just a lot of downside for a player. Systemic downside, individual talent downside. We'll be fading him almost entirely outside of when he falls severely below ADP. That'll do it for us today. Leave a comment. Let me know if you think I missed anybody that is significantly overvalued heading into the season for best ball. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Matt_Gajewski. Happy to interact there. Until next time, good luck, everyone. We'll see you next time.